Okay, it's only 6 pages, so maybe we'll do this one. So we're going to do a political compass test from the perspective, just randomly, I feel like doing this. Randomly from the perspective of an absolutist. Of course, I'm a bit of an absolutist philosopher myself. I've talked about the thought process a lot and that way of thinking. And so it doesn't mean I am one myself, although I have certain tendencies and ideation with it. But it doesn't mean that it's me saying it. It's just from that perspective that I've spoken a lot about, written about, right? So you have to not take it so literally though, and like, somehow some of the answers might be offensive or whatever, right? It doesn't mean it's me, but I'm sort of playing into it a little bit. Let's use that as the barometer. So what would it be like? How would I explain an absolutist? It's somebody who does things in extremes, or, well, it would be considered extreme, but it's somebody who does things in a consistent manner, like, let me try to give an example. Like in a story, right? You would have a character who, whether they're right or wrong, based on the audience or based on even their place in the story, like, oh, they're the villain, or based on how other characters feel about them, they would be very consistent in their beliefs. They would never doubt what they're doing, right? It would only be a matter of their ability and how well they do it. So there'll be elements of like self-governance. There'll be elements of, do something all the way or don't bother doing it at all. And so, like Light Yagami, for example, is a good example of an absolutist character where, once he gets the notebook in the first episode, he decides what he's going to do, and he never doubts again whether what he's doing is right. He just goes for it. So now it becomes a measure of how good he is at getting away with it and doing it, not a question of, oh, am I right or wrong, or whether I should do it or not. That never even crosses his mind. He commits to it, he's fully devoted, and that's it, right? So if economic globalization is inevitable, it should primarily serve humanity rather than interests of transnational corporations. I mean, how would they interpret that? Because, um, serve humanity, like, that's such a broad statement that it's hard to say. But you probably would either strongly agree or disagree. You wouldn't be in the middle because you're kind of, you know, that's the whole point, that you're going to be on one side or the other. If globalization is inevitable, it should serve. That's such a hard thing to interpret under this concept, but I'd rather support my country, whether it's right or wrong. Now, that would be on two levels that you would disagree. First of all, if it's wrong, okay, you should disagree with it. But second of all, you would trivialize the very notion of the first line. So an absolutist would disagree with this line twice in two halves. I'd always support my country. I don't care about the country. Countries are just lines on the map. Again, so says the absolutist. It's just arbitrary. It doesn't really matter, right? It's completely just made up, right? It's not even a real thing. So why would you take it so seriously? It can be useful for certain purposes, right? But you wouldn't take it that seriously in the first place. So you wouldn't even care about that. You'd be indifferent. It can be useful, functional at best, but it's just imaginary. And then even further, even to the extent that you would take it seriously, if you do, you would also say, okay, I'm not going to blindly just follow it no matter what. So that one is insanely, even beyond strongly disagree. No one chooses their country of birth, so it's foolish to be proud of it. This is almost like an absolutist statement. This is correct. Like, this is literally me saying it. Not only that, no one chooses their race, no one chooses their gender, no one chooses countless other things, so it would be foolish to be proud of it. You don't choose who your family is, so it would be foolish to love them or care about them or place too much emphasis on them. Again, this might sound a little harsh and extreme, but this would be the thought process. You don't choose to be born in the first place, so you should place no special value on life then. You don't choose to who your family is, so you shouldn't care about them on any irrational basis either, or undue emphasis. You don't choose where you're born, you don't choose, again, gender, race, anything, right? Inherent. You don't choose any of it, so why should you care? Why should you place special emphasis? You would only care about your actions and something of more significance. Our race has, and this is such a weird statement, because who are we even talking about? Are we talking about the human race? Superior qualities compared with others. Again, this would be the absolutist interpretation, whichever one it means. Um, it's a good way to explain it. Like, it's not for moral reasons, like, oh, the absolutist would be such a person who believes in equality and is so morally good and whatever. No, it wouldn't be anything like that. It would be much more straightforward or even cynical. Like, it's not useful. So, for example, I could pose it in the business world, right? It would be done more so for greed or for some other reason, like efficiency. So, in other words, a company hire somebody, right? And let's say the absolutist owner, whatever, right? They might personally have something against that race, let's say hypothetically, but they would still hire them. Why? Because we don't have the luxury. This is the line. We don't have the luxury to discriminate, because if we do, then our company will go under and be less successful than other companies, because we have to hire the most efficient people. So even if they personally don't like it, they would still deal with it, because they know, like, okay, we only care about efficiency. Something like that is superficial and it doesn't matter. So I'm not going to arbitrarily turn down a qualified candidate just because I don't like them for some other reason, right? Because then I'll lag behind the competition and I can't afford to do that, and it would hurt the bottom line. So that would be the reasoning. So again, it would be above superficial identity and things like that, but not for the reason that, oh, look how accepting and wonderful we are, right? For some gratifying purpose or other basis. It would be something else. It would be like, it's not useful, it's completely meaningless, it has no impact, right? So because it has no impact, we don't care about it. The enemy of my enemy is my friend. This is sort of a false duality that you wouldn't really get into, right? It's not as simple as that. You can use them for that purpose, but um again, you would only say that enough. This one maybe warrants that. You disagree on the basis of, you wouldn't use that sole criteria to say they're your friend, but you may use that in a functional way, like, okay, let's band together to beat a common enemy, but I still don't like you and you're still not my friend. So you may work with them, but you wouldn't take it as far as calling it friendship. So that one is a little nuanced. Military action that defies international law is sometimes justified. I mean, again, this one gets back into the consistency issue. Who's coming up with this international law, whatever. But if you are going to have it, then what's the point, right? Either you, like, it's one of two things. Either you're an anarchist and you don't believe in the law at all, in which case just tear it down and don't even do it. Or if you have law, then you better follow it. So it's like, that's the point. Like, you're not saying whether the law is right or wrong. You're saying that if you believe in it, then you have to believe in it consistently. Again, that's what they're always about, is consistency. Or then just don't do it at all, right? So don't give a half-mast prognostication. So like Kimberly from Full Metal Alchemist, we were just looking at the FMA game, actually, is kind of a good example. He always respects people in terms of their consistent belief. It doesn't matter whether he agrees with them or he's on opposite sides of them, he's trying to kill them, whatever. He respects their consistency. Like, if you're going to do something, then live up to it. Don't do it halfway, and then he mocks pride for that at the end. There's other examples. He just wants to see that, like, whatever you believe, at least believe it fully and do it consistently. There is now a worrying fusion of entertainment and information. That would be a folly favoritism perspective here. So what you would do with this is, and of course, a lot of these are just my terms, but it's whatever. Within this mindset, what you would do here is, the absolutist would look at this from the perspective of, it may be true, but it's up to the user. So for example, you don't have to, I don't know how to really say that. You would agree, but you would still blame the people for falling for that, right? Like, even if you say, like when people say, oh, everybody's brainwashed by TV, but then just don't watch TV, just choose not to watch it. So it's not the TV's fault, or the fact that, oh, the government or whoever, media companies, are trying to brainwash you through it. It's your fault for falling for it in the first place, or even watching it in the first place, or not seeing through that. So you would agree, but you would still blame the person for falling for it. People are ultimately divided more by class than nationality. Again, you wouldn't care about nationality much at all. You would view it as arbitrary, functional at best. So people are ultimately more divided by class. That's kind of a tough one. I mean, class is at least more functional, because you would have, based on wealth, based on other accomplishments, etc. So I guess that would make sense. Right, you would shun nationality. I like that one statement. Can I go back? Or that one was written like an absolutist, actually. Let me go back. This is actually, yeah, this is literally an absolutist statement. So this sums up what we're even doing. We're doing it from this lens and perspective of the person who would say this line. No one chooses their country, so it's foolish to be proud of it. And I listed off, that applies to a lot of other things. That is actually perfectly within the context of what I'm doing. Um, okay, that makes sense. Controlling inflation is more important. See, this is like my objectivity. I'm not saying that it's me who's saying this, although partly somewhat, but you can do this with anything. Like, let's role play as an evil person and try to do it like that, or let's role play in this case as something that is beyond morality, where it's not about right or wrong. It would be the same perspective. Like, if an absolutist is going against somebody else in some sort of argument or battle or whatever, right? They would respect that person from a certain perspective. Like, they wouldn't care about the moral aspect. They would be like, okay, I'm on my side for my interest, you're on your side for your interest. So I can't really, I can't question that process. It only makes sense that you would do that. You should do that. So now it just comes down to ability as far as who is better at accomplishing their interest, right? But they would never moralize and say, oh, you're morally wrong and I'm morally right. You would realize it's all just arbitrary and relative and functional and self-serving or whatever. So again, it would just be a respect of who is more consistent with their belief or who is more effective at fulfilling it. Controlling inflation is more important than controlling unemployment. That one's kind of tough to look at. I mean, they would both be important, and controlling how, like that one's sort of vague and just I don't even know what to make of it. Because corporations cannot be trusted to voluntarily protect the environment, they require regulation. I mean, there would be a certain emphasis of self-preservation that if it really was a priority, they would end up inevitably doing it. So, and it's also blame the consumer, right? You're the one who got it to this point. People are so self-righteous about it, but it's like you're the one who uses all the products and benefits from all the things that the corporations have done by ravaging the environment in the first place. So it's actually the consumer and the everyday person's fault. And even all these politicians who would be all self-righteous and telling you to do whatever would be the ones who enabled that all the time. So it would be very strange to look at this one. They cannot be trusted. You would disagree because it wouldn't be regulation. It would be self-actualization. You would just simply not enable that. You would have never allowed that process in the first place. You would not regulate it through the government as much as you would. I mean, I guess you could do that as an incentive, but it would be more on the individual basis. You would just be like, okay, I'm going to live a minimalistic life that doesn't require the products from this corporation. Therefore, it would remove the need for them altogether. That's an absolutist phrase that I always use. Remove the need. So, for example, how can I explain that one? It's sort of like path of least resistance, but not exactly. It's like rather than try to solve a problem, you remove the need or what creates it in the first place. So, for example, you could say that, oh, I'm working 3 jobs to feed my family, but it's like you're the one who chose to have kids or to do that. So if you couldn't handle it, then why did you do it in the first place? So then don't complain about it or use it as an excuse. That's your choice, right? You're the one who created that situation. So the absolutists might have just not had kids in the first place. Now they don't have to work 3 jobs because they're doing what they can handle and what they enjoy and what they want. And if it's too much for you to handle, again, then why did you do it in the first place? Nobody forced you to do it, presuming the premise. So the point is that um again, why struggle with the flawed process rather than just when you could just remove the need in the first place? I had a better way of explaining that, but now I can't remember. I mean, this would be something that would come up with in my debate format a lot. This would be sometimes the lens from which I would make arguments when I would participate, or I would be, often just a judge in that. I was just doing the Phoenix Wright thing like on Thursday, and so that's almost a form in which I could use for the debate format. Like I could have people, one person is the judge, one person is the prosecutor, one person is the defense, and just sort of play it out in there. But I guess in this day and age, people would just do it over text chat or some shit, or I mean voice chat rather than that. What would I say here? Oh yeah, the remove the need analysis. Like, what would be the point? How would I explain that? Like, rather than overcompensate for a flawed process, you simply remove the need for it altogether. So you would not. Right, like, oh, we're gonna even like with environment control. Oh, we're gonna destroy the planet. But first of all, you couldn't destroy the planet if you tried, right? We could launch every nuclear bomb, whatever. It wouldn't destroy the planet. The planet survived far worse than us before. Meteors and, ice ages and mass extinctions, right? The planet's been through way more than you could ever inflict upon it. So don't get too cocky and high on yourself that you think you could destroy the planet even if you wanted. But what you could do is make it uninhabitable for yourself. So first of all, it's mere zero sum self-interest. So there's no higher standard, and self-gratification is not justified because you're not doing something great or heroic or whatever. It's just zero sum self-interest. You just want to preserve your own, species and not go extinct. Right, just make the planet habitable for us. So that's number one. You would sort of take that gratification out of it. But number two is you would decide to actually say, okay, if you really wanted to do that, then just stop, go live like an Amish person, go live off the land, which even with the overextension and how high the population is, that may be difficult. But the reality is that, yeah, live off the land and just live a minimalistic life. Now there's no problem because all the things you consume are, made by corporations or whatever, destroying the environment, are no longer necessary. You'll just be self-sufficient. You'll just live off the land, hunt, gather, basic stuff, and everything is solved. So if you really cared, you could do that. And so the point is that people get to a point where they're in this half-mast state, which again, absolutists would criticize or distance themselves from, which would mean that you would hold the standard that, oh no, we got to save the planet, but then you would also live a life that actively contributes to destroying it or sort of benefits and rewards that, like, all this overextended technology and conveniences, things you could easily live without, but that you choose to indulge in anyway. So there's that stark inconsistency. This might take longer than I thought. Um, from each according to his ability to each according to his need is a fundamentally good idea. More than likely, you would obviously disagree with it from this perspective. From each, like, so based on your ability, like, in other words, give people who are less able more because they need it, and take from those who are more capable just because you can. So like somebody's wealthy and highly successful, so they have to pay more taxes, and then you give that to the poor because they're whatever less capable. So you would absolutely disagree with that, and you would be much more self-sufficient and say, just deal with it, right? You got to fend for yourself, and if you can't, then because what you'd be doing is sort of victim blaming, as sometimes people call it, elitist victim blaming, elitist victim blamer, more so with the joke title nickname that you may be given in observing this. But what it shows you actually is it's a positive thing that you're believing in human potential so much, like, if human beings can fly to Mars and the moon and do all these crazy things, and if so many individuals have done these amazing things, right, then why can't you? So it's a question of, it's believing in your potential so much that it's a form of love, it's a form of positive, perspective on people. But you sort of people often don't push themselves. Most people are lazy clowns. Even I'm a lazy clown. The freer the market, the freer the people. um I mean, in this sense, you would look at it from an inherent perspective. Like, there's no such thing as a free market. There's only such a thing as a restricted market. Like, in your inherent state, the inherent man, another term I would use a lot, like, you would just be free to do anything anyway. So your rights are not given by anything, anyone, or anything. Even people say God-given rights, but you're simply born and you can do whatever you want. And so only at that point can you be restricted from that ability to do literally everything possible that you're physically capable of doing. Right? You can only be restricted, which you are in many ways. So that restriction has to be justified. So it's not even a question of you being free or the market being free. It's just a question of every restriction that there is, you have to justify from an inherent state that you have, rather than looking at it like, oh, look at all these freedoms we have that we've been given by the government. But if they can give it to you, they can take it away. Like Malcolm X, I think, said that. If they can give it to you, they can take it away. So the point is, they're not giving you anything. They're restricting your inherent abilities or even if people want to look at it like God-given rights, but even that's an extrapolation. But you're doing it that way, but you realize that again, they're just inherent abilities, so you need a reason to justify why or how you are restricting them, rather than needing to justify like, oh, why should you be able to do it, or you should be somehow grateful. The fallacy of like permission, like, oh, we need society's permission to do something. No, you need a good reason why they would restrict you from doing it. It's a sad reflection on society that something as basic as drinking water is now bottled branded consumer product. I don't know how you would look at this. You would disagree because you would just say, get it yourself. Just go and, the sad reflection on our society that something is this one's kind of tough to say because you wouldn't really play into that. You would just say, okay, I'll just go get my own water. I'll just go to a natural source and, nobody can stop me. Nobody would even know. Right, it's just because you're too lazy and entitled that you would buy it in the first place. So I'm not entirely sure. It's kind of complicated. Land shouldn't be a commodity to be bought and sold. I mean, it's sort of how you would look at it, but it doesn't matter whether you think it should. It's like that's just the way that people are going to do it. So it's not like a socialist view that, oh, land is owned by everybody and just shared and stuff like that. It is a perspective that would say, I don't know how to really interpret this one. Land shouldn't be a commodity to be bought and sold, but then what else do you do with it? Like people are always going to, I don't know, even in the realm of self-governance, which might be the perspective here, you would say that what else are you supposed to do with your money then if not, you're highly successful and you cure cancer and you terraform Mars and you uh create renewable energy. Aren't you entitled to something for all that you made so much money? So I'm not fully sure about that one either. Some of these are like weirdly written. It is regrettable that many personal fortunes are made by people who simply manipulate money and contribute nothing to society. That is kind of bogus because again, you're not the one, hate the game, not the player. Like you're simply playing the system. So you would criticize the system and say, don't blame them for taking advantage of it. Blame yourself for allowing the system to be the way it is or for it just being the way that it is. Right. So it wouldn't be like that at all. They're just doing the right thing. And if you were as good at doing it, then you would have the same benefit. So protectionism is sometimes necessary even in trade. Probably not because you would say, you know, survival of the fittest, something, just deal with it yourself. Don't be one of these big brother reliant type of clowns like, oh, I need the government to protect me from every little thing and then make it bloated and overextended. Overextension is a great sin of in the eyes of the absolutists in the perspective that you would have you would overextend in such a way that everything mass produced suffers in quality for it, whether it be education, whether it be products. So you know that the things that are most widely available and mass produced are never the highest quality, and so therefore that even applies to human life and society. The more people there are, the more restricted each one becomes for the sake of this collective and something like that, where the more people there are, the less fully alive they can be, or things of that nature. There's some overextended restriction to it. So there is no sense that, I don't know, that you would want to overextend too much. And wait, what was I saying with that even? Protectionism is sometimes necessary in trade. Just that you should be able to handle things yourself as much as possible. The only social responsibility of a company should be to deliver a profit to a shareholder. I mean, to deliver a good product effectively. Um, make money. I mean, that is the point. This is a zero sum process. The rich are too highly taxed. I mean, in what context though? Highly taxed where? Like you don't even know what country we're in. So what if I live in a country where they're not taxed at all? Like it doesn't even make sense how this question works. the rich are too highly taxed. Um, in a certain sense, you would look at it like, yeah, nobody would be taxed, and you would just do whatever you want, right? There wouldn't even be taxes at all, and you would just say, "Fuck it, just deal with it yourself." You know, if you want to do something, do it. So to some extent, it might not make a whole lot of sense, but it would be a situation where, again, it would be sort of social willingness. Like you would expect, okay, you can do it if you want, right? You would look at it like it's not like it's charity, but you would, if someone wealthy wants to build roads, they can. If not, then deal with not having roads. Like it wouldn't be a compulsory thing. So those with the ability to pay should have higher access to. Those with the ability to pay should have higher access to. I mean, and that's true that they do too. Government should penalize businesses that mislead the public. This is a strong point here for the absolutists: is that government should have nothing to do with this because government wouldn't even exist. You would be self-governed, but it's like you can just take care of yourself. So, for example, it's your fault for being misled. So this is the victim blaming perspective. Like, no, you're a clown. Don't be misled and deal with it yourself. You don't need a little babysitter in the government. A genuine free market. I don't know why I decided to do this as part of this mobile game thing, but whatever. Just to hold it off. So I'll just try a couple of them. Let me try to finish this by like 8, and then I'll do 8 to 9. I'll do some mobile games and the permanent thing. I was just kind of in the mood because we're doing just chatting and kind of looking up which ones I want to do. Right, I was just looking up like best mobile games and stuff. A genuine free market requires restrictions on the ability of predator. No, no, because the way that that would work is it's not that you would restrict them; it's that you wouldn't enable them. So you would do it like, you know what I mean? You would just let that be. So if it happens organically, how can you stop it? Somebody's just good at what they do. But there would be less enabling, like what you see from governments where, oh, we're going to give them a grant, we're going to give them a special subsidy and all this kind of stuff. If you take away all the benefits and then you naturally just happen to make a monopoly just because you're so good at what you do, then how can anybody stop you? So it would be more fully organic though, and it might be more rare. But no, like somebody genius genuinely just comes up with something, right? Like I'm working in my garage and I make a renewable form of energy in some small scale, and now I'm able to mass produce it. But then, I only mass produce it because I get a grant from the government. So you wouldn't get that, and you would have to figure that out yourself. Abortion when the oh here we go, dude. Abortion when the woman's life is not threatened should always be illegal. Um, so this would be a personal responsibility argument where it's your choice again, excluding the very not the majority of circumstances of assault and other cases, but the point being that it's your choice, so you should deal with the responsibility of it. So in that sense, but it's not even illegal. See, this is you might question this. You'll say it shouldn't be illegal because the law should have nothing to do with it. But on the other hand, it should be stigmatized and you shouldn't do it, right? In an ideal perfect world, this would be the perspective that nobody should do an abortion because in an ideal perfect world, those health issues wouldn't exist, let's say, and everybody would be at least adopted or uh yeah, so either through adoption or so yeah, the legal part you address here, but the core concept of it is, yeah, the government should have no say in it because that has nothing to do with it. But in the other side, in an ideal world, nobody would even do it because there would be no health concern, or there would be no assault situation, or there would just be adoption, or you would just take personal responsibility for your own actions. And there was like a certain hierarchy that I made for this too, like it's your choice whether you like I had 4 layers to it. This is the absolutist perspective on abortion. Here, I'll make the chart again. It's like, how can I show it here? You would have what do we have, like again, excluding those few instances. Whoa, why is this so big? You choose whether to engage in, right, we'll use my term, engage in stimuli acme, right? Then you choose to level of protections within that. Then you choose to like with who, I guess, to what extent that matters, right? And then you choose what else, like, so you choose whether or not to engage in the stimuli acme at all, without which you wouldn't possibly get pregnant. You choose what you do along the way, whether you're protected, etc. You choose with who, and so now you choose responsibility to take care of it. So, for example, if you didn't want to get pregnant, this is the whole like my body, my choice interpretation. If you didn't want to get, I can't even spell. If you didn't want to do it, then you wouldn't even engage in the act that could lead to it, right? So it's like, oh, you want to choose not to get pregnant. Okay, then just don't have sex. Or you do want to have sex, but then you want to be very well protected, and then you somehow still become pregnant despite that. So then deal with it and take responsibility for your own choices and your own actions, right? Because it's impossible to say, well, it's your choice that you want to have an abortion, but it was your choice to get pregnant, and your actions led to it, right? Assuming that majority of circumstance. So the point being that you chose it, so you have to deal with the responsibility, consequence of your own action, or just simply don't do it. Then just be simply, what is the term for it? Like, uh, celibacy or something, whatever. Like where you just choose not to have sex. Just do that then, right? You could do that, and again, it's not even saying that you should do that, but it's so many layers of choices. Just don't have sex at all, or if you do, then deal with the responsibility and the consequence of it, or use protection and whatever. So you have so many options. So if it comes down to, oh no, now I just happen to be pregnant and now I want to do that, it's like you're taking away, it's your body, your choice, but it was your choice to have sex, and it was your choice to have unprotected sex, and it was your choice to have sex with that deadbeat person who your judgment was so bad that you happened to, be with somebody like that. So there's so many layers of choice that you ignore, and then you act like, oh, now it's my choice after the fact from a certain point of view. All authority should be questioned and held accountable to the fact of what purpose does it serve, right? And the same thing with restriction. Like, you're going to restrict an inherent ability that a person has, so you better justify it. Why does it need to be restricted? And so there becomes a fallacy of like power for power's sake. Like, you have to justify yourself to power rather than power having to justify itself to you, like, or people glorify it like, oh, look what a good leader, look what a good. No, it's like they only exist for functional purposes, and they should be held accountable all times. Like, what purpose are you serving? Why do you still need to exist? And ideally you wouldn't need them at all. So yes, an eye for an eye, leave, and a tooth for a tooth. Oh, I thought it was gonna say leave the whole world blind. What does this even mean here? An eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, just like revenge in kind. I mean, this would be sort of in line with the self-governance, but it would be, sort of harsh punishment, maybe more death penalties for killers, things like that. Uh, there would be some nuance to it because you wouldn't rely then on other people doing it. So you would say, okay, somebody does it, you take revenge, like Liam Neeson style. So pretend there was no government to do it, then yes, you could do this, but it would be up to you to do it. So taxpayers should not be expected to prop up theaters or museums, folly favoritism, that cannot survive on a commercial basis. That is a pretty good way to look at it. I mean, the point would be, let's say there aren't even any taxes, or it would be optional, right? This is like agree on multiple levels. You would say if you want to support it and donate, that's up to you as an option. So there's no reason why you would be forced to pay a tax for it. But number two is you shouldn't even need to do that either, where you donate. It should be able to be self-sufficient or something, even if it can't survive on a commercial basis. This goes back to the other rich person thing. Like, a rich person could choose to take care of it themselves. Like, I'm going to make a museum just because I feel like it, and I'm going to do the upkeep myself. So I don't need anybody's money. I'm just going to do it, right? Schools should not make classroom attendance compulsory. I mean, it's kind of not. You can already do homeschooling and other things like Yeah, there's no reason why a formalized public education system, anything mass produced, suffers inequality, like I say with the thing. Um, it applies to education as well. That's why public schools are bad. So even when you condemn something like that, there's a fallacy like, oh, so that means you're against education, period. No, you're just against the specific application, and you might have some idyllic alternative that you pose that may or may not be practical. But just because you have to defer to the lowest common denominator because it's the best that you have doesn't mean that you can't recognize its fault by inherent nature. Just again, something mass produced for 300 million people, like in the United States, it's meant for everybody, is not going to be the best, highest quality form of it, right? You're just doing it out of necessity and again, overextension. The truly best form of it would be much more limited. It would be one on one. It would be, higher standards. So, in that sense, yeah, it absolutely shouldn't be compulsory. All people, oh my god, this is maybe more than I thought. All people have their rights, but it is better for us all that different sorts of people should keep to their own kind. You wouldn't acknowledge even what that means, different sorts of people. Like what does that mean? Is it to do with race? Is it to do with class? I don't even know what they mean by that, but you wouldn't really care about that. Um Again, that's one of the defining ways to look at it. You would sort of bait people. It could be like a writing technique. If you're writing like a story, you would make it think like, oh, look how much this guy believes in equity and whatever equality and giving people chances despite whatever race or anything. But it has nothing to do with that. They wouldn't care about that. It would just be, I care about efficiency. If you're good, you're good. If you're not, you're not. So they're not doing it because, oh, look how open-minded I am. They might even have something against something, for some reason, but they would look past that because they only care about the zero sum functional basis. Like, okay, it's gonna make me more money, so I don't care, right? I'm willing to look past it for that reason, just for efficiency's sake. Good parents sometimes have to spank their children. I mean, I don't know where they get some of these fucking ones. You would think almost you'd be willing to do that, but that's kind of a tough one. Like you'd be willing to do it, but you wouldn't do it, kind of. Right? Like you shouldn't need to. If you're a good parent, then you should be able to do it some other way, but you'd also be willing to do it. It's sort of tough. It's more like if you need to do that, then you shouldn't have had kids in the first place because you clearly don't know what the fuck you're doing. So I guess you would be harsh, but you would be harsh more so verbally than physically. Like again, the victim blaming, high standard. The physical is sort of beneath the absolutist. You need to engage in physical forms of anything. It's natural to like how they look down on physical labor, for example. It mundane, it's the stuff of animals, which also applies to the Stimuli Acme. So both sex and physical manual labor are the stuff of animals. So would say an absolutist from the perspective that sex is just animals humping and physical labor would be better off being done by animals, like a horse pulling a wagon or something. So you're looking down on it and sort of holding a higher standard for people that you shouldn't obsess over those things or make your whole life about those things or glorify them like, oh, look what a hard worker you are doing something that is so menial physical labor for zero sum functionalism, sustenance, etc. And also fulfilling your non-choice reaction needs that you never chose to have to eat and drink and whatever. And then um, the other point is stimuli acme, like you shouldn't base your whole life around it. It's just half mass hedonism, etc. Things like that. Just the human egotism turns what would just be hedonism into something else. It's natural for children to keep some secrets from their parents. Um, yes, but if the parents were sort of a little open-minded, objective in and of itself, there wouldn't be as much of a need. So the need is only assuming that they're not absolutists themselves or things of that nature. So that one's a little bit convoluted. Possessing marijuana for personal use should not be a criminal offense. I mean, Again, you could look at it like no drug should be a criminal offense then, because people should be able to handle it, and if you can't handle it, then it's your fault. So it's like the lack of sympathy for drug addicts or gambling addicts or whatever. Like, it's a luxury to use it in the first place. The amalgam theory, like, there's people in the world who don't even have food, but you have the luxury of having recreational drugs or whatever, drugs in general, and you have the luxury of being able to gamble at the casino for fun, and then you get addicted, and then you want to feel like you're the victim. Like, you're taking a luxury and a positive thing and turning it into a negative just because you don't have self-control. So again, it's like the victim blaming thing again, that it shouldn't be a criminal offense. Arguably none of them should be, and then it's just personal responsibility. Like, it's your fault if you can't handle it, right? Because you're taking something that is just an extra luxury and turning it into some negative. The prime function of schooling should be to equip the future generation to find jobs. People would argue like, oh, it's to teach them life skills or certain things, but outside of that, but it's kind of a tough. I don't know, actually. If you were to say that, like, yes, but in just a natural discourse, I guess it does say prime function. So yes, that should be the prime function. And then naturally you may do other things as well, life lessons, whatever. But the point is that it wouldn't be what it is a lot in the modern day, where it's like an indoctrination tool too. That, oh, you got to respect authority and all these kind of things, indoctrinate people in a way that has nothing to do with it, with no functional basis. People with serious inherent, yeah, this is the one that it's an absolutist phrase. It's not me saying it. I'm not saying that, but this would be. My friend actually made a clip of this to do with this exact subject with XQC. Watch, I can even find it. So I don't have to say that to acknowledge that that is a very direct quotable line from an absolutist that you could point out, right? Like, where you say, remove the need, right? You know that that's going to pose a problem. So what would you do? It's not even that they shouldn't be allowed, though. It's more that they would choose not to if they were an absolutist themselves. So it's a little bit tricky. But the point being that you would realize, okay, there's some negative thing I'm going to pass on to the child. So how do you do that? You remove the need by simply not, rather than saying let's deal with the negative thing, right? Let's just deal with it and overcompensate for it. You instead would say, I'm going to remove the need for it in the first place, right? And just minimize that. So it would be a little ways back. Um oh yeah, here. And I see that somewhere towards the end here, he's taking the same one and he agrees. So that would be exactly the same scenario. Okay, so saying it should not be allowed is a little bit different than saying that they would choose not to themselves. Right, so it's a little tricky, but we'll leave it. The most important thing for children is to learn to accept discipline. No, that's the same thing we were talking about with the indoctrination. If it has a functional basis, then there would be no need to do it in that manner. Things of that nature. But again, like, not be allowed by who, right? Like, that's the thing. That's kind of sometimes what we're objecting to, like on the abortion level. Like, it shouldn't be illegal, but they still shouldn't do it. So there's a different, social Darwinism would be a big theme of the absolutist. And so you got to look at all this in the context of, we're just doing a thought experiment rather than actually making these claims myself. This one's kind of hard though, because saying they should not be allowed is like too heavy-handed, because you're saying that somebody else would be making them not do it. But the principle is they would choose not to do it, right? But you wouldn't necessarily stop other people from doing it. I don't know. There are no savage and civilized people. There are only different cultures. No, there would only be different levels of technology that allow that appearance to be had. Right? It's technology that enables all things. Like, there is no morality. It's just you mistake greater or lesser advancement in technology for greater morality. Like, so for example, people would say, What was my line with that? Like, morality is a plaything of conquerors. Like, once you, oh yeah, you built your country on the graves of the people you conquered and on the backs of slaves or whatever. Like, people say that about the U.S. On the graves of the Indians and on the backs of slaves. And so the point is that ultimately, now you can be all moral and high and mighty, but it's only because you benefited from those things in the first place. So it's like it's more to do with your technology and the, the accomplishment of others. Those who are able to work and refuse should not expect society's support. Yes, there would be no expectation. Even if you do work, you still shouldn't get society's support because there wouldn't be any sort of, I don't know, altruistic collective overextension. When you are troubled, it's better not to think about it, but to keep busy with more cheerful things, folly, favoritism, distraction, things of that nature. This would be very much in stark contrast to the absolutist mindset that if there is a trouble, you don't ignore it or you don't even overcompensate for it. Like, oh, let me do this thing to make myself feel better. No, let me address what it is that's making it negative in the first place, like, and change it or remove the need for it again. Like, if it's your job, then you can't handle your job, so don't do it, or do something else, or it's a conflict of contrivance that you overextend, where you're taking the inherent state and extending it into something else, right? So it's not natural, and it's at odds with your inherent nature, and cognitive dissonance will come from that, and so it's like shooting the messenger. It's not don't blame thinking about it. It's not the fault of thought. It's the fault of what the situation is. So you would address the situation itself. So distracting yourself does nothing, right? You're acting like, okay, I'm going to reinforce what is negative then, or I'm going to overcompensate for it somehow. Like, even not distracting it, like, oh, let me do something that makes me feel better about this negative process that is objectively adverse, right? So then I reinforce it. So I say, I know it's not good, it's objectively flawed, it's objectively bad, but I'm going to reinforce it by overcompensating for it, basically. First generation immigrants can never be fully integrated. You wouldn't care about, again, superficial identity, things like that. What's good for most successful corporations? Um, that doesn't really have anything to do with anything. The no broadcasting institution, however independent, like what does this even mean? What's good for the most successful corporation is always good for all of us. You wouldn't have any horse in the race one way or the other. No broadcasting institution, however independent, should receive public funding. However, well, if it's independent, then its funding could be independent too. It wouldn't say that they never should. It's just saying that it's your choice, right? If you want to pay, that's what these things would come down to. You could voluntarily decide to do it, but it wouldn't be that you would be forced to pay for it, and it would place more onus on them to that they could be self-sufficient in a way. Right, like that would be one big theme of it, is just that everybody should be self-sufficient, and if you can't, then maybe you shouldn't exist. Or you shouldn't, whatever, the company shouldn't exist. Right? So it's like, oh, if you can't handle it, then just don't do it. It's like the person who is a doctor or something, oh, my job is so stressful, but if it's so stressful, then go work at McDonald's and then, deal with that. Then it won't be as stressful as being a doctor. So like, you're doing it for your zero-sum self-interest, you're doing it for money, you're doing it because you want to. If it's not rewarding enough, then go do something that is relative to how much you make and how much work you have to put in, whatever. So our civil liberties are being excessively curbed in the name of counterterrorism. I mean, it depends who you're asking and in what context. These are two like heavy-handed claims. Like, what are you talking about, dude? Sure, this is a political compass test. Like, this is just a random claim. Who is us even? Like, based on what country you're living in, based on the time you're living in, like, I just feel like they could be worded better. Um, sure, like whatever, for the pretense of benevolently protecting everybody from a small number of people, we will enable and empower a group of people, in government, etc., to have endless amounts of power that'll keep going on and on and on, when you realize historically the basis would be the greatest atrocities are always committed by governments, never by random individuals, because they don't have the means or resources to do it, right? They'll commit negative actions on a small scale, but the real threat always comes from the power structure in the first place. So the whole point would be that, here's the absolutist phrase that I would put on here, is that you would have the reason why laws and the government exist in the first place is under the premise that people are bad and need to be restrained, right? So people are bad and need to be restrained. That's why we have laws. But in order to achieve that, we empower those same bad people, right? Assuming they fit in the same mold. So we empower those same bad people to hold the bad people in check. But then there's a contradiction, because you're saying that people are inherently bad. That's why we need laws to restrain them. But then we empower other people who are still just bad inherently, right? By the same context, we empower them in order to better restrain all the other bad people. But the contradiction being that those same bad people that you empowered are now going to be subject to that same standard. So rather than being restrained, they're being empowered, right? And they still suffer from that same inherent human nature tendency that would be the premise for why you need laws in the first place. So a significant advantage of this is just like me rehashing a lot of things that I had said in the past, like in the debate format and stuff. A significant advantage of a one-party state. Here we go, dude. Called the Democratic Party of the United States in 2024. We have a one-party state because they're aligned with the corporate-owned media, like the clowns that they are. But more accurately, like China right now. A significant advantage of a one-party state is avoids all the arguments that delay progress, but the point is those arguments would only be, you know, there would only be an argument if there's something substantiative behind it, and if not, then social Darwinism should decide, and so you would never worry. It's like about censorship. You would never worry about anybody saying anything, because if it's not true, then that should speak for itself, right? If it So it wouldn't be like you would never get offended by anything. Like if you say something to like if you say something that's not true, then why would you be offended? Because you just know it's not true. So it's pointless. You just dismiss it. If it is true, then you would already know it, so it's redundant. So then it becomes pointless, right? It might be annoying, just like, oh yeah, I already know that because it's obvious and it's objectively true. And if it's something else, then it's just random and arbitrary. So if it's true, you already knew it. If it's false, then you don't have to pay any mind to it. And within the context of social Darwinism, you would have the ability to say, well, the best ideas should win out and the worst ideas will die out. So you would never need to censor something. You would say, there's some expression with this, like, you wouldn't need to censor your enemies. You would just frame their words up on the wall for everyone to see all the more, right? Like, oh, when somebody's making a mistake, don't interrupt them, sort of. Like, you would frame their words up on the wall and say, look how stupid they are, or look how bad they are based on their own words, right? Because if what they're saying is so bad, then why would you need to censor it? You would make a bigger point of it and point it out more. In this age, you would retweet it just to show, like, oh, look, their words are so bad that you would never support them or agree with them, rather than, oh, they're so bad so they need to be censored, right? But the best way to turn somebody against those words wouldn't be to censor them. It would be to let them see it, and then they would be turned against it if it is that bad in the first place, right? So that level of value is present with respect to you would never feel the need to be offended. You would never censor something because, again, either it's a crime, in which case that could be a different case, although it could just be a direct threat basis that you would use to say it's a crime. Even then, you could say you shouldn't delete or censor something like an internet message or whatever, because you could still use it as evidence, so you still wouldn't need to delete it. But aside from that, right, you would never be worried, because it's like, oh, they're saying something that's not true, like, oh, all these Orwellian terms like misinformation or disinformation, but they would only be relevant, they wouldn't be very persuasive then, and you could win out in social Darwinism then by making a better case. The best argument against it isn't to say, oh, look how bad what they're saying is, it would be to make the accurate case, like make a better argument rather than saying how bad their argument is, and then your argument would win and fizzle out through social Darwinism the same way. Although the electronic age makes official surveillance easier, only wrongdoers should be worried. No, that's a fallacy in itself. Like, oh, if you're not doing anything, although that could arguably be the case. If you're not doing anything wrong, then why would you be worried? But, because of its potential for misuse, you wouldn't want that. The death penalty should be an option. No, you wouldn't agree with that. Like I was saying earlier, it could be the whole Hammurabi's code type eye for an eye thing. But again, it wouldn't be the death penalty. It would be, see, it's sort of contradictory because you would say, yes, you should be able to pay back in kind, eye for an eye, but it wouldn't be the death penalty. You would be the one who would be doing it, assuming that self-governance standards. So it wouldn't be through the government, but it wouldn't be also, it would be for an equally serious crime to what was done, right? The punishment would match it. In a civilized society, one must always have people above to be obeyed and below to be commanded. No, that's kind of part of the self-governance thing again. Abstract art that doesn't represent anything shouldn't be considered art at all. I mean, it's subjective, so who is to say what it should and shouldn't be considered, right? In a criminal justice, punishment should be more important than rehabilitation. I mean, it's not really so much the punishment, but the power and the threat, like the enforcement standard that, you know, you're never going to be preventative, right? You won't be able to stop crimes from happening. You just use the power of the threat to appeal to self-interest, the same self-interest that would make them commit the crime in the first place, to say you're afraid of getting caught and being punished, so therefore you won't do it for that reason. So even if it's still in self-interest, uh so it is more important to the extent that without that, then people wouldn't feel motivated not to do something. So even rehabilitation is like ex post facto justification, like, oh, well, now they'll become a good person, but that has nothing to do with why they did it in the first place. So you're using the enforcement, the punishment as a preventative measure to say your fear of it is going to be what prevents other people from doing it. So you need that power and the threat. So the waste of time to rehabilitate. I mean, sure, again, you could pay them back in kind and, they wouldn't even be around to do that. The business person and the manufacturer are more important than the writer and the artist. I mean, writing is very broad because you could write something that then the business person uses to inform their decisions, or the manufacturer's blueprint is written, like, depending on how you want to interpret it. So it's hard to say what exactly that means. Um, it depends how you look at it, but again, within folly, favoritism just meaning like entertainment, escapism, that can certainly be true. Even things that are considered art would be arguably useless from a absolutist perspective. So there is some value to that. In fact, that is almost an absolutist term, like something that has functional basis rather than just something ideological or whatever. Mothers may have careers, but their first duty is to be homemakers. It wouldn't be anything to do with the mother. It would be, it would be to do with parents, but the whole drop of mother doesn't really matter there. Right, if you have kids, you got to take responsibility, but um no, I mean you could easily pose a hypothetical. The father could do it, and the mother makes six figures and the father doesn't, so you could reverse the roles and stuff. So it would disagree there, but it would also agree to the extent that if you have kids, you have a certain responsibility to that as well. So you agree on the basis that it's your duty as a parent, but you disagree because it's making it about the mother. Almost all politicians promise economic growth, but we should heed the warnings of climate science that growth is detrimental to our efforts to curb global warming. And this is obviously a whole fallacy. just from the perspective of, again, you couldn't destroy the planet if you tried, or running out of resources is more of an immediate concern, right? We would run out of fossil fuels before we ever destroy the planet or get to that point. So it's always a fallacy. Like, that's the bigger concern, and the bigger reason to try to get renewable energy is you're just going to run out of resources before you truly destroy the planet or whatever. Making peace with the establishment is an important aspect of maturity. No, you would remove the need for it altogether. Wait, but there's a 6th page, so why is, oh, that must just be the, if you got through this okay, you'll find the proposition, wait, what? You'll find these propositions on religion a breeze. Oh, here we go. Astrology can accurately, this is my one line, absolutist line over here. Astrology, just because it's a thought process doesn't mean that, like, you're not coming up with your own, I have defined it in certain ways that a lot of these lines are mine. But imagine blaming celestial objects for your personal problems is my little riff on astrology. Can explain many things. I mean, yes, they can explain things to do with celestial objects and space, right? But not to do with, it depends what many things you're talking about. But the point being that, um, even belief systems may have functional uses. So there's a certain absolutist respect for that, where religions aren't real, but you also realize something else about them, that if it gives people structure and makes them more productive and gives them a certain bypassing of cognitive dissonance that might otherwise cripple them, although you would remove the need for that as well, then it may be useful. So even though you don't really advocate for the belief of it, you would say, oh no, it's useful because it keeps people in line, or it makes people more productive, or it gives people peace of mind, or whatever the case may be. And you also realize that even if you say, well, you shouldn't believe it because it's not real, you would say people also do things in their life that aren't real anyway, like folly favoritism, like entertainment. That's not real, but you still put in a lot of time and effort into it, whether it be movie or TV or etc. So it's the same psychological tendency that you're going for, that it's something that isn't real, but that you're taking seriously almost as if it is real. Even though here you might acknowledge with folly favoritism that it isn't real, you would not do that with religion, but deep down you might realize it. But again, it's if it's functional, if it's useful, if it's bypass the cognitive dissonance, it gives you certain structure, then it can still have positive effects nonetheless. You cannot be moral without being religious. I mean, fucking, what the fuck is that? Charity is better than social security. Yes, that's exactly what you. Some of these are lines that could be taken straight out of an absolutist handbook here. Right, that's the point. It should not be forced, it should not be taxed, it should be a choice. And if people are so bad that you don't think they would do it, then fuck it. That's just the natural course of how people are then. Blame the people then for doing it. Some people are naturally unlucky. You wouldn't believe in luck. It's just, luck would be a standard that assumes that the world revolves around you, and a sort of human egotism to the point that even if you do get struck by a bolt of lightning, that's just your fault for being out in the open during a storm. Or, this would be the perspective. You would be, it would be your fault for not taking precautions. It's your weakness. It's all these kind of things. You can control far more things in that situation than you realize, right? Focus on the things you can control, minimize the things you can't control. That is like an absolutist phrase, right? Don't focus on things you can't control. It's more important that my child's school instills religious values, or any values at all, would be the same point. Oh, wait. Oh, okay, they're just making these shorter. Let's look at the Stimuli Acme. Stimuli Acme outside marriage is immoral. You would not place any special. See, this would be the absolutist view of sex. It would be neither positive nor negative. So you would get rid of both. You would get rid of the undue emphasis on both counts. So, for example, you wouldn't unduly stigmatize it and say, "Oh, it's immoral to have multiple partners," or blah blah blah. Right? You wouldn't care. It's just hedonism. Fine. It's half mast hedonism. It's inherent man's tendency. Who cares, right? You do it because it's enjoyable. That's just the base tendency. So you wouldn't unduly stigmatize it, but you wouldn't unduly glorify it either and say, oh, it's love, it's meant to be, base your whole life around it, split your finances down the middle, right, to encourage the family system that's easy to control by society. You wouldn't do that either, where you glorify it out of proportion and act like, oh, it's the meaning of life and it's love and it's this and that. So you wouldn't glorify it or stigmatize it in a major way, you would treat it just like what it is just a base inherent process. A same-sex couple in a stable, loving relationship should not be excluded from possibility of child adoption. I mean, of course. Why would that even be a consideration? Even people who are against those things wouldn't say that you can't adopt. I don't really get it. No, you would be big on adoption, especially as a response to abortion too. From the you could do this with so many different perspectives. Like I should use this as a course in objectivity to show just because you can make a compelling case for something doesn't mean you actually believe it yourself. That's where people sometimes get, misframed. Okay, I won't even say the word. Depicting consenting adults should be legal for the adult population. I mean, again, things like that you wouldn't worry about the law for anyway, right? And people always blame that, like, oh, it ruined my relationship. But the reality is that it's one of these arguments of like more options or imagination is a bad thing. It's like if that's all it takes to ruin your relationship, all it's doing is like raising your standards. Like, oh, that's more exciting and interesting. It's like being desensitized. Like, oh, technology makes people desensitized to like social interaction or something. Maybe that just means that they find that more interesting and people are just boring, right? So it's showing how obsolete something else is. So it just reveals that something else isn't good. So don't use that as an excuse. You shouldn't need to censor all imagination and reality and fantasies just to make your half-mast state of being seem better, right? So you're just blaming everything else in existence, like, oh, this invalidates my half-mast state because it makes me realize that there are better things out there and things I would enjoy more. Now you can take it with a grain of salt and be realistic, like maybe that's not practical, right? Whatever fantasies and things might happen, but you shouldn't that is the ultimate cognitive dissonance. Like we have to censor everything in reality that would contradict with our half-mass false absolute state being revealed, like, oh, you're the only one for me, but then I see something that's better that I prefer, so therefore I'm going to invalidate it. um so the legality issue would not even be a question, but what would be the point is the simple fact that you're able to um say, oh, you get addicted to it, but that's your fault for getting addicted to it, right? Have self control. And then number two is, oh, it somehow hurts my relationships or something. But again, your relationship shouldn't require you to censor fantasy or reality or whatever, imagination, right? Those things can be out there, but you can take it with a grain of salt. It's like when boomers say that about TV, like, oh, we prefer TV over the internet, even though anything you could watch on TV, you could watch on the internet anyway. You would just have more options and more choices. So it's like you're condemning having more choices because you're saying we want to be restricted because then we don't have to think, or, we don't get overwhelmed. So, like, more choices is bad, kind of a fallacy. What goes on in a private bedroom is none of the business of the state. Again, you wouldn't be placing any special emphasis, so why would you care? No one can feel naturally. Honestly, you would look at it from that perspective because it would be analogized to fetishes, I suppose, here. The little psychological context that, well, because the human imagination is so good that you would be able to enjoy it for sort of different reasons. So you may very well say that, but it wouldn't matter. That doesn't mean it's a bad thing. It just means that what you really like might be something different. Like, how can I explain it? If a guy likes being pegged by their girlfriend, it might indicate something there, or it might overlap. So it might be more analogized to a fetish than actual whatever people treat it as. But again, it's the same result, and that doesn't mean there's anything wrong with it. So, well, I don't know. Actually, it's kind of hard to. People always say that, like with jail, somebody goes to jail, and like Ben Carson said that. I think somebody goes to jail, and then they. It would be hard to really say this, but generally speaking, I don't know. Because even this, nobody feels naturally heterosexual either, because you go through certain things throughout your life, like you go through puberty, so you're not. I guess if you were to say born, it would make more sense. Like nobody is born that way because when you're born, you're not anything. You're just kind of still developing, right? It's only when you get to a certain age, the certain experiences, etc., would indicate that. So again, just saying that there's certain circumstances that lead to you being that way doesn't mean that it's a bad thing to be that way. These days openness has gone too far. It depends how you mean that, because yes, you would see the way it's saying it is probably different than the absolutist intention here. They might say it's gone too far, as in it should be stigmatized and controlled more, right? But the absolutist would say it's just gone too far as undue emphasis, like whether it be positive or negative, or just our fixation and obsession on it, right? So it's not so much the openness that's the issue, it's just the fixation on it, period, that's an issue. Part of which would be the desire to not see it be so open, right? It's sort of a hard thing to explain. It's not as big of a deal in a positive way or a negative way. Oh, it's stigmatized. You're such a bad person for doing this. No, it's just sex. It doesn't matter. Would be the perspective, and then also uh, glorifying it sort of out of proportion too. Let's see where the hypothetical absolutist would appear on this chart. Starting point, original compass, or is this just an example? Okay, here we go. Economic left right would be, and not even mine, but my hypothesis here. Economic left right 4.36. Social libertarian authoritarian. Okay. So you're libertarian and you're right, more so. Social scale. Personalized compass showing your own positions available online. So authoritarian is obviously higher up. Yeah, I mean, you would be placing more emphasis on personal responsibility and self-governance and things like that. And you would be also, I mean, left and right is kind of meaningless. Like, it doesn't really tell you anything. These terms are too broad to have any meaning. They're just overused. But if you were to say, again, just sort of more freedom here, less freedom there, basically, it seems like it would be even more that way. But some of the answers are misinterpreted because they think you're answering one thing, but you're answering something totally different because your perspective is so much beyond that. So realistically, you might be like down here, right, in the total bottom right, because assuming what that would mean is like there's no restriction of any kind on anything. The government doesn't even exist. It's like anarchy, just with respect to, you just don't even need it because it's just, you're so self-sufficient that you could just self-govern and things of that nature. So yeah, I like how a lot of the questions miss the whole point. So now let's do a mobile game just to fucking actually do what I said I was gonna do.